Let's get reaction to that story now. I'm joined by Professor Brahm Fleisch from the Wits School of Education and Sadtu's Deputy Secretary General, Nkosana Dolopi. Thanks for your time, gentlemen. Appreciate it. Prof, let's start with you. So the Minister says between 10 and 20% of pupils are not attending classes, 53,000 in Gauteng alone. It's a worrying situation, isn't it?
Certainly. It's extremely concerning. I think that we're hoping that children will be getting back into the routines of learning. That they're not coming back is a serious concern.
Yeah. So let's talk to you, Nkosana, about the measures and everything that the Minister spoke about today. As Sadtu, are you buying it that all schools are doing well when it comes to protecting pupils and teachers from COVID-19?
Look, we are concerned by the fact that so many learners would not have gone back to school. What concerns us more is because we know most of these children are coming from the townships and most of them also coming from the rural areas. It means COVID has then disrupted the lives of the poorest of the poor children, and it is those who will not be able to progress in such a way that they finish their school in record time. We are really concerned about that. The teachers have done well. The teachers have done everything that they could do in terms of making sure that they recover whatever work that they could have recovered after the disruption of COVID. You must remember, teachers are doing this thing with a very, very low morale, we must say, in 2020. Their morale is so low because their employer, they have not shown much appreciation. I mean, we are 4 months, for instance, from April, when teachers should have received their increases. So they are working under circumstances where they are not appreciated by their employers. They are trying their best under these difficult conditions where you have a very insensitive employer that does not even try to meet them halfway in terms of pushing their morale.
Yeah, we'll talk about what you're going to do next to actually address that in a moment. But Prof, given what Sadtu is saying about low morale when it comes to teachers, how does that affect teaching overall? Because you have these people who are supposed to be educating these learners under a very difficult period, but at the back of their minds, they're also worried about not getting salary increases.
I mean, look, that's an obvious concern that many employees are experiencing at the moment. I think it's not unique to teachers. There are people in the public service more generally and in the private sector that have not only not received increases, but in many cases have actually had decreases in their salaries. So I think we're in a situation where across the board there's been very substantial concerns raised about salaries, and it has an impact on us all.
Yeah, so let's talk about the impact on pupils in particular, Prof. Does that mean that they're not getting the best out of teachers?
I think there are lots of real challenges. I mean, there's no doubt that some learners are not returning because they're concerned they may be living with vulnerable adults and grandparents, and they're not going back because they're worried that they potentially will take the infection back home. I think many kids are also the kind of disrupted nature of the schooling process, with kids going a few days at a time, a couple of days in the week. It's often quite difficult for kids to return to routines of learning. And I think that in some cases, particularly for the little ones, for the foundation phase learners, the disruption of the routines has meant that they're having difficulty getting back into the daily tasks of going to school. And that means that for many children who aren't in a routine, in a learning space, it's going to be very difficult to remediate this huge time where they haven't had an opportunity to learn effectively.
Nkosana, you hear what the Prof is saying about the impact this will have on teaching and pupils in particular, but you're in a very difficult situation, right? Because teachers do deserve an increase, especially during this time. What's your next move with the Education Department to ensure that happens?
Look, we are calling on them to do what is correct. We are calling on them to honor a contract that they entered into in 2018 with teachers and all public servants. We are saying they should be a responsible government. They should be a responsible employer. They should not set a wrong precedent of signing a collective agreement and at some stage just decide to walk away from that collective agreement. You can't then have workers being happy if they are treated like that by their employer. If an employer could walk away from a collective agreement, why wouldn't workers at some stage just decide to also walk away from a collective agreement if they feel like they are not happy about that? So we are saying to consider the question of the morale of the workers, because you must remember, teachers are even using their own data. They are using their airtime in trying to interface with these teachers. They have extra classes, which means when you have an extra class, you need to then have to have more money set aside for petrol for when you have to come back to conduct these extra classes. So if you don't get an increment, I mean, of course, it then affects your pocket, and it will then have an effect in terms of your salary and your work that you are doing.
Nkosana, I've run out of time, but just a yes, no, or maybe. Are you considering strike action then?
Our options are open for now. We are in court. We are trying to push and say that government must lead by example. They must be a leading employer in our country. They can't collapse collective agreement. If you collapse collective agreement, if you collapse collective bargaining, you are creating anarchy. You are going to promote anarchy. If you destroy institutions of peace, instability at the workplace, you are going to introduce anarchy. Public servants ought to be treated and respected in such a way that they should be able to deliver their work in a kind of spirit, their spirit should be raised. And the only way to do that is when we have appreciation from their employer.
Thank you so much for your time, gentlemen. Appreciate it. That was Professor Brahm Fleisch from the Wits School of Education, and Sadtu's Deputy Secretary General Nkosana Dolopi.